Guys, what's up and welcome to Skrrt Garage. My name is Connor and I'm really excited to have you on the channel today because today we're going to talk all about the ownership experience I have had with this 2015 Jaguar F-Type R. I've now owned it over a year and I have done so much with this car. I've taken it to a dyno, I've put intakes, supercharger crank pulleys, I've taken it to autocross, I've worked on it myself, I've had work done on the car, I've done lots and lots of drag races. I've just had an absolute ball with this car. And with that, comes maintenance and comes repairs and it comes, things like that. So what I want to do today is talk all about what it has cost me to daily drive this car for a full year. I'm going to break down all the maintenance, all the repairs, and all the aftermarket modifications I have done to it. And then we're going to jump into the driver's seat. We're going to drive around. I'm going to tell you guys about some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses that this F-Type platform has. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay guys, real quick, before we jump into the maintenance, repairs, and modifications, I want to make a quick shout out to the members of this F-Type community. If you're not a member on the Facebook groups, you definitely should consider it. They're really good people. They try to help you if you have any sort of sticky situation with your F-Type or if you have a question. They're more than willing to help you out. It's a very good group of people, and especially if you have a local Jaguar car club. I know there's one in Southern California that are really good people, and they're all about promoting the brand and teaching people about its roots and how cool this car culture can be. So if you have a local chapter, definitely look out for them and join them. It's a really good car community. And if you're not on the Facebook forums or on the forums at jaguarforums.com, definitely consider that as well. Okay guys, we're gonna start off with the maintenance. It should be known that I do all of my own maintenance. There have been a couple things where I'll let a Jag specialist or a dealership do, but for the most part, the numbers I give you will be the numbers that I have actually paid for just the raw materials to get the job done. So first things first, ironically, I didn't do this one myself. It was an alignment. This car has hydraulic steering. It is amazing. I love it. But when I bought the car, it tracked straight, but the wheel was just a little bit crooked and it kind of bothered me. I'm very OCD like that, so I took it to the dealership and I had them do an alignment for me. And PS guys, if you are going to get an alignment done on this car, definitely go to the dealership. In my experience, no one can do an alignment better than the dealership because they know exactly what specification to set it to. They know what torque spec is needed for every single bolt when they're accessing all the tools that they need to align your car. So definitely do that. It's worth the extra $50 to $100 that it costs. For my specific dealership, they ended up charging me about $200 to do an alignment, and I thought that was totally reasonable for the job. Okay, the next thing I did in maintenance was an oil change. I changed my car's oil once every 5,000 miles, and I went ahead and I bought an oil change kit from FCP Euro. The entire kit that included the oil, the fuel filter, crush washers, drain plug, all that came out to about $94. And so I paid for that kit, got it out, I did the oil change. I can show you guys the DIY video I made for it right up here. Click on that if you guys are interested in how to do it the old-fashioned way. I did also make a Mighty Vac oil extractor video. It wasn't on this F-Type, but if I were to do another oil change on this car, which I will have to in another 1,000 or 2 miles, I will be using that oil extractor. You could do an oil change on this car with an extractor in about 15 minutes or 20 minutes tops. It's super, super easy. So if you do want to know how to use that extractor, check out another video I have right up here. I can put the link up in the upper right-hand corner of this video. But let's move on with some more maintenance that I've done with this car. After that, in my reliability video I made, I talked about how these cars have a specific issue with the injectors. They can get kind of gummed up and clogged up, and they can allow excess gasoline to get shot into the combustion chamber, and that can leave you with kind of a blown head gasket looking exhaust soot coming out of the back of your car's tailpipes. And so the best way to take care of this is to prevent it, and you do that by running an injector cleaner additive inside of your gasoline once every 3 to 4 months. When I first bought the car, I used BG44, a product that is very well known on the Jaguar forums. After that, with my own independent research, I liked using a product called Lucas Oil injector cleaner. That is way cheaper, and it has just the same amount of positive results, and data proves that. So I think the combined total of using the BG44 plus the Lucas Oil injector cleaner was about $40 for the year, which is really pretty cheap. Okay guys, this next maintenance item can be viewed as a repair or maintenance. I'm going to go ahead and classify it as maintenance though, because it is very common on these cars, and it is of course an O2 sensor. I made a complete video about it. These are very expensive if you buy them from Jaguar dealerships, but you can get them at the OEM Bosch website for like a third the price. I believe it was $89 to buy it and replace it myself. It took about 20 minutes, and I made a video, and I can show you guys exactly how to do it if you click right up here. So we have to add that up to the list. Let's keep going. The last piece of maintenance I did was an oil change for the rear differential. Now, I've talked about this a whole lot. The rear differential, it gets worked pretty intensely with all the torque that these engines have. And so it's really important that you change your car's differential oil for sure, if you can help it, before 40,000 miles. That's what I would recommend. And that's what I did. It cost about $70 for me to do it myself, and I would highly recommend that you guys do it as well. Again, I made a DIY on how to do it up in the right hand corner of this box if you'd like to check that out. Okay guys, that is everything. If you add all of it up for the maintenance, we have a $200 alignment, $94 oil change, $40 for the injector cleaner, $89 for the O2 sensor, and $70 for a differential fluid change. If you add all that up, it equals $493 to maintain this car for a full year. And some of that, of course, was preventative maintenance. Keep that in mind, guys. The oil change doesn't have to be that fast. Same with the differential fluid, doesn't have to be changed at that interval, but I have a better peace of mind doing so, and that is what I did. Okay, let's move on and talk about some of the repairs. Well, first things first, I only had to do 2 repairs, which I thought was really pretty great. The first repair I had to do was actually not even a repair, it was just a software patch. When I bought this car, I noticed that the tweeters up by the front vents were kind of rattly, and it sounded like the plastics were kind of like banging against each other at certain frequencies. It just didn't sound that good. And when I was on the forums, I noticed that there was a technical service bulletin for all the Jaguar techs to fix some of that tweeter issue. And I brought that up to my service advisor when I went in there, and he told me, okay, yeah, we can throw that patch on there for you, but it'll cost you 98 bucks. I think it was like 112 with tax. And so I said, okay, I do love music, and that's so much a part of the experience when you're just commuting and driving around town. So I said, sure, that works for me. I paid 112 bucks, and I ended up getting that software patch taken care of. And to be honest, guys, it really did help. I think it helped eliminate a lot of that fuzziness and buzzy that the tweeters of this car had. So if you guys are noticing some of that, definitely bring this up to your service advisor and see if you guys can get that technical service bulletin done while your car is under warranty, so you don't have to pay for it like I did. Okay, let's move on to the next repair that I had. The next repair that I had to do was a failed pinion seal. And if you don't know what the pinion seal is, it's a seal that's at the front of your differential, and your differentials, when they get too hot or when they have too much pressure built up in them, that oil has to go somewhere, and it goes most of the time through the front seal, which is the pinion seal. And I've had to replace a lot of seals in my days, transmission and differential seals. And when I looked up how to do it on this F-Type, I noticed that there's just a lot of specialty parts needed. And I don't plan to do this job more than once, so I don't want to buy these parts and just have them for no reason. And not to mention, if you guys have ever replaced a seal, they can be really finicky. I've replaced a couple seals that have failed almost immediately because the housing was wrong or something was wrong. Long story short, I paid someone to do it for me. They charged $330, and it's been flawless ever since. I do have to mention, I never put this on camera, but I paid a Jag specialist to do it for me, and about 3 days later the seal failed. So he had to redo it and warranty out that work and do it all over again. And I think proof is in the pudding that if a Jag specialist had to redo it, it's just a tough job, and I wouldn't recommend someone doing it unless they have all the tools and all the know-how, because again, yeah, you'll waste another 3-4 hours of your life dropping the exhaust and doing the whole thing all over again. All right guys, if you have been keeping track, the repairs I've had to do was the $112 software patch and the $330 failed pinion seal. If you add those up, it's $442. And if we go ahead and add the maintenance costs with the repairs costs I just told you about, which is $493 plus the $442, that equals out to be $935 of combined maintenance and repairs that I've had to pay for with this car in 1 year of ownership. And considering these days that, you know, one oil change if you go to Mercedes is well over $400, $935 really isn't that bad, especially when you consider that I have autocrossed it, I have raced it, I have really enjoyed the time with this F-Type. I am totally willing to pay for that in a year's time. Okay guys, let's move on to the fun stuff. Now we're gonna talk about all of the aftermarket goodies that I've put on this car. And well, let's start with the wheels. The very first thing that I did to this car was change out the wheels. When I first saw this car unveiled in 2014, I knew that my perfect specification for this car would be a white car to show off some of the black accents of the hood and the front bumper with the carbon blade wheels. And through the Facebook group, I found an owner who didn't really like his carbon blade wheels. And so I ended up meeting him midway between Colorado and here in Oklahoma. I think I paid him like $600 extra because these are worth more than the wheels I had on my car, and we swapped wheels. So that was the very first thing I did. After I put the wheels on, the very next thing I did was buy an aftermarket intake. And even though they don't really add much for power, it has been probably my favorite modification that I've done to this car, albeit the very last thing I did. Because to me, the intakes of this car are just so muffled from the factory, you can hardly hear the supercharger at all. And now with these massive open cone filters, it just sounds like a little Hellcat. It sounds so good. I actually was leaving a Cars and Coffee event, and there's like 100 some odd people there, and because I'm a child or maybe a Mustang driver, I don't know what I am, but I punched it, and you can hear the whine coming from these intakes from like 100 yards out. It's just so cool. So those intakes cost about $300. So yeah, first things first, the wheels $600, now the intakes $300. Okay, after I put those intakes on the car, I went ahead and I installed some aftermarket brake pads. They're called Porterfield R4S brake pads. If you want to see the video on how to do that, you can click up here. The install itself was pretty straightforward. The reason why I did it was the OEM stock brake pads that this car comes with, they just have a real stiff bite to them. Not only that, but the main thing was they kick off a crazy amount of brake dust. My wheels would turn like a gray color almost immediately after driving them, and it felt like I always had to spend so much time on the wheels when I would wash my car. So I read that the R4S pads had the same braking capabilities as the stock pads, but they're easier in traffic and they have way less brake dust. So I went ahead and bought them. I believe those were $230 for the front and the rear, so pretty economical as well. Okay guys, next up, I put on some aftermarket tint on my taillights. I know it's kind of a cheesy modification, but I think with the way that the taillight kind of swoops around the side profile of the F-Type, when it's in all black, you can see just that little outline of the LED lights. It looks incredible. Very good way to spend $40, and that's what it cost me, by the way. And I didn't make a DIY video of this because it took honestly like 15 minutes max. If any of you guys live local to me here in Oklahoma City or around me and would like me to help you do it, come on by. You can just leave a comment in the comment section down below. I will do it with you guys and I can make a video and post it after. Okay, let's move on. The next thing on the list that I did was put on some aftermarket spacers. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I love the wheel design of these carbon blades, but it doesn't quite fill out the wheel arches of this car. And so I wanted to have the wheels flush with the fender flares of the car. And so I found that 15mm spacers had it exactly flush, and it really just made it look like a, I don't know, like a bulldog, very muscular stance. And so I went ahead and bought these. I bought a brand called TZ. They're forged aluminum 15mm spacers. They cost $121, and I had them shipped over. I did all the work myself. I can show you how to do that right now in a DIY if you click up here. And I guess you guys are seeing the theme here. Any of the DIYs or modifications that I've done to this car, I've tried to make them available to you guys to see them and to do them yourself. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. After that, I've actually never made a video about this or even told anyone about this, but when I first took this car to autocross, I noticed that there was a little bit of pitch every time I turned into a corner. And so I wanted to reduce the roll a little bit, but I didn't want to change the dampers because I thought the dampers felt really good over bumps and around traffic. So what I ended up doing was buying a polyurethane sway bar bushing. Now these are really cheap. It was like $85, and basically what it does is stiffen up the sway bar in between both links of the wheel, and it probably decreases body roll by about 10 to 15%. So very little, but it was enough that I could feel better bite going into a corner. So I did do that. I filmed it, but that was way back when. If you guys do want to see that, just let me know. After I did the sway bar bushings, another video that I've made that I've never posted was I wrapped my mirrors black. I think this looks so good. Obviously from the factory they were white. I wrapped them black because I think it accentuates the belt line of this car. Again, I made a video. If you guys want to know how to wrap your mirrors, it was like 40 bucks, super cheap, very easy to do. Let me know and I can get that done for you guys. Now, after I've done the intakes, the wheels, the wrapped mirrors, the big shebang that I did was change out the crank pulley and of course an ECU tune from Velocity AP. That has been by far the most manic difference that I've noticed in this car. It went from about 570 horsepower all the way up to 650 horsepower. It is so fast. It doesn't feel like the same car. It honestly feels wild. And I used to have a GTR. I've had a lot of other fast cars. I've had tuned M cars. This thing takes the cake, bar none. The throttle response is immediate. We'll talk about that later when I jump into the car, but just know that if you do plan on getting an aftermarket pulley and tune, just know it will completely wake up your car and it almost won't even feel like the same one. So that was very expensive though. That was like $1,900. I do think that I was totally worth it because again, the car is just, it's a supercar killer now, but it still wears this luxurious GT car camo. And so it's just very cool. That was the last big modification that I made to this car. Okay guys, with all that said and done, all of the aftermarket goodies, I have spent $3,250, which is quite a lot. It's actually over 3 times more than I spent on any of the repairs and maintenance combined on this car. So I think you guys can tell kind of where my priorities are with this car. I obviously have loved it so much. I have spent more money on aftermarket goodies than I have on fixing it and repairing it, and I think you guys probably will too. So that bad rap sheet of being unreliable, undrivable, it's just not true. I can promise you, you'll most likely end up spending more money on the fun stuff than the miserable stuff, if you will. We're now gonna jump into the car and we're gonna talk a little bit more about some of the strengths and weaknesses that you will notice when you daily drive this car. So let's jump in. Okay guys, welcome to the driving portion of this 1-year ownership review. We're gonna talk about a couple of the strong and weak points of this car, you know, daily driving it every single day like I have for this past year. So yeah, let's start off with the basics. I don't even need to be driving for this portion, and it's the infotainment. It's kind of a double-sided sword. I have the 2015 F-Type R, and in 2015, the infotainment wasn't at its peak, let's just put it that way. Audi, for example, they're known in the car community for having some of the best tech, some of the best infotainments out there. Same with Mercedes. The new MBUX platform for Mercedes is great. This isn't. It's very rudimentary. Honestly, the kind of dials and setup are very Toyota. And I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, oh, that's ridiculous. This is a $100,000 car. How can you pay for something like that? But this is actually where I would say something positive about this. I think that's a really good idea. Now here's why. Jag isn't known for their infotainment. They just aren't. So I'm actually happy that they're not trying to bite off more than they can chew when making an infotainment system. And you know, I think that it's smart that they gave us kind of a more basic system, at least in the older models, like a 2015, 2016. I think it gets better as they advance, like a 2017, 18, 19. I think they're a little bit better. But I actually commend Jag for focusing their money and their time and the driving dynamics and the beauty of this car versus their infotainment, because I think if they would have tried to go overboard, I think it would have flopped. I don't think it would have been very good. For example, I had a 2018 BMW M2, and that had the wireless CarPlay, and BMW at the time was the only one that had wireless Apple CarPlay, and it was really, really cool, but it didn't always work. You know, it was very laggy. Sometimes it would pop up text messages that everyone could see when they're in the car. It kind of, as cool as it was more of a gimmick than it really was useful. And so, again, I'm glad. I would rather a Toyota bulletproof, easy to use system like I have here than an overly complicated, worthless system. And so that's kind of what I would like to say first off about the infotainment of my car. Now, you can kind of back that up with the same theory on the sound system. And I've talked about this in another video I made, 10 surprising things and only an F-Type owner would know. And it's that the sound system in this car, it's good if you compare it to a Nissan Altima or a entry-level Audi, entry-level Mercedes, BMW, but when you start comparing this to the very echelon, the top-tier models from Audi, Mercedes, BMW, this sound system just is not as good. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it's just not as good. And so I would like to point that out as well, as far as a weakness goes. And yeah, let's talk about some strong points. But to do that, we actually do have to get going. So we're gonna take off. I'm gonna go ahead and put the car in dynamic. Don't worry, it's already warmed up. And we're gonna talk about some of the strong points of this car. Okay. Strong point number one, it is freaking fast. Oh my gosh, this thing is fast. Especially now with the Stage 2 tune, and if you haven't known, I put a lower crank pulley and I also put a software ECU tune on the car. I went and had the car dynoed. It's now making about 650 horsepower. It is extremely, extremely fast. And guys, I've had naturally aspirated V8s, V6s, I've had just about everything. You do not know throttle response until you've tried this car, I promise. This thing has the Roots style supercharger, which is slapped on top of the V8, and when that thing is spooled up and ready, oh my gosh, does it just give you a mountain of torque anywhere. And especially if you give it maintenance throttle, and I'm sure you guys already know this, but maintenance throttle is when you are cruising. Let's say you're at 4,000 RPM. You're at 4,000 RPM, you're in gear, and you're cruising at that speed. Maintenance is when you have enough throttle position to hold whatever RPM you're at, but you're not accelerating or decelerating. If you have the car in a maintenance throttle position and then you punch it, your head flies back and it hits the seat. It's that powerful. I can kind of show you guys that here right now, but again, you do not know throttle response until you've tried this car. It is just absolutely incredible. Okay guys, I'm going to show you that in-gear maintenance throttle. So I'm cruising right now. I'm not going any faster, but I'm about 3,000 RPM. let's move on to another strong point of this car. And I think that's gonna have to be just how big of a chameleon this thing can be. And when I say chameleon, I mean it can do everything. If you drive this to a Cars and Coffee event, you can park it next to a Lamborghini or an Audi R8 or Ferraris, and it doesn't look out of place. It looks like it belongs there. And you can also take this thing to an autocross course like I do, and it can compete with the very tiny, Miatas on racing slicks, and it can compete with the Lotuses. And granted, this is a very big car. It's kind of a porker, it's like almost 3,900 pounds, and it's competing with cars that weigh 1,000 pounds less and are designed to do well in those environments. And not only that, right now we're in stupid mode with the full dynamic, all the exhaust, all the crackles, all the sound. But if I want to, I can slide this dynamic indicator over, I can push it forward, the car will go back into its chill mode, and I can drive around town, I can do my errands, and it's quiet. It's reserved, the seats are comfy. This thing is just awesome. It has such a split kind of Jekyll and Hyde personality that you just don't find for this price point. And I know some of you guys might be itching to write, Chevy Corvette, but that's an American car with American car plastics and traits. And I do think that the car is awesome, power-wise, performance-wise. It's mean, it's muscular, but it just doesn't have the same characteristic lines of this F-Type. This car is just very, very good at suiting your personality in that moment. So if you want to be an idiot, the car will be an idiot. If you want to relax and go run some errands, the car will relax and go run some errands with you, which is just cool. You don't find that very often. And I really, really enjoy that Jag, when they designed this car, they made it 60% a Grand Tour and 40% an all-out sports car, and I really, really do appreciate that. Okay, the last thing I'd like to talk about, I've mentioned it before, it's the visibility. The visibility of this car is wanting, to say the least, and here's why. The windshield of this car is so raked, you sit so far low, and to keep the perfect golden ratio of the design of this car, they had to make the roofline low, and so basically all things point to having a very raked windshield, which is good, it looks amazing. But when you're in this car, if you pull too far forward on a street light, there are literally sometimes where I have to do this, where I have to crane my neck down to see when the street light turns green, because it is that low. And especially when you put these visors down, I mentioned this in another video, you have to check it out, the 10 surprising features of an F-Type owner, but the amount of visibility you have is the size of a fist. It's about 6 inches right here to see directly out in front of you, which is just kind of shocking. I think the only car with windows, shorter and the vertical height than this is maybe the brand new Camaro, because these are just so short, everything is so raked. I mean, again, I love it. I do think that's definitely accentuated by how dark my windows are, but the visibility isn't ideal in this car. But we're gonna go ahead and assume that if you're cross-shopping this car, you don't care so much about visibility, you don't care so much about back seats, obviously, because there aren't any, and you definitely wouldn't care so much about getting in and out, because again, this is a sports car, it's never gonna be a Toyota truck. Speaking of Toyota truck though, this thing has really good gas mileage for how fast it is. I mean, it's a massive supercharged V8, and it's a root style supercharger, which is the least efficient of all superchargers, and I still return over 20 miles to the gallon on average. That's pretty freaking good if you really consider the kind of performance you're getting out of a big old V8. So kudos to you, Jag. I love your work. I love this car. You have to drive this car to understand it. The steering has a really nice heft to it. There's a really good weight and structural rigidity to the car. It just feels very solid when you first get in and you're going around corners. That exhaust noise, it's thunderous. It's just a very, very cool environment. And if you haven't driven one, you just wouldn't find this recipe in any other car. I mean, the only thing that comes close, again, is the Chevy Corvette, which Right now, the mean age of every Corvette buyer is about 63 years old, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus or say it's not a good car, because I think it's a great car. I just think that this thing is on another level of refinement than that car. And sure, it might lose to it on a track, but putting around town, this noise, this comfort, this view, how it looks, the unassuming characteristic that this car has. I can't tell you how many times somebody will hear this thing start, they'll turn back around and look to double check what kind of car this is. It's just very cool, and I do hope that you guys get a chance to drive one. So with that, let's move back to the garage and we'll finish this video up. Alright guys, there you have it. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Don't forget to leave this video a big old thumbs up and a very positive comment. I read and respond to almost all of them. I appreciate you guys. Have a great one, and we will see you next video. Peace.